Ali, what do most founders not realize but should realize about getting their first 1,000 customers?
That's a very good question.
What would be your top 3 tips and strategies for startup founders to get their first 1,000 customers?
The first thing is that's the most important thing. Second most important thing is, I'll just say the third thing is...
Ali, in the course of writing the first 1,000 newsletter, you've gotten a chance to speak to some really famous startup founders. What are some of the craziest and most unexpectedly brilliant stories you've heard about how some startups got their first 1,000 customers?
One example that really comes to mind is, and what he did was, and it worked.
This was an interview with Ali Abouelatta, the author of the first 1,000 email newsletter on Substack, all about how famous, successful startups got their first 1,000 customers. The newsletter has become very popular and now has over 75,000 subscribers and growing every day. Ali is super smart and knowledgeable, and this was a fantastic interview. Enjoy. Ali, how did you get the idea for the first 1,000 newsletter, and why did you decide to focus on this problem of how startups get their first 1,000 customers?
So first 1,000 started off during the pandemic. So it was March. Everyone was at home. I needed something to do. And the thing I started doing at the time was going onto forums and like communities. There's a bunch of Slack communities. I always wanted to like build a company. So I would go to like founder communities and just like see what people are talking about. And I think just like going through them, answering a bunch of questions, seeing what people care about, it looked like there was this thread about, how do we get customers, or how do we, reach liquidity on a marketplace? And a lot of the questions, I guess, that people had kind of revolved around this idea about how do you kickstart a company. The cool thing is I knew vaguely a bunch of these answers, just like indexing on other companies. Are just like, I saw this interview that Travis from Uber did 2 years after they launched the company. And he talked about all these like cool things they did in the first 2 years. And that's something I did. I found it very interesting to go on YouTube, filter by date, and just see the first time like Patrick Collison gave an interview, because, these interviews are more raw. They just like, there's no PR at the time. You don't know if you're going to be big, so people are a lot more unfiltered and they just like give it to you straight. It's like, like this is really good content. And most of the time I would have 300 views or 500 views. I'm like, wow, like that's gold. So I spent a lot of my time watching these videos. And when people would ask the questions on forums, I'll just go be like, hey, like, this is what they did. Go watch this interview. And I did that a bunch of times that I realized it's like, maybe there is some value in just aggregating all this, synthesizing it in one place where, you could spend 2-3 minutes reading it. And it looked like people had some interest in, like that kind of content. So I gave myself like 4 posts. So like, I'm going to post 4 times and see what happens. And I think by that time, I saw a lot of signals. I was like, whoa, like there's something here. Maybe I should continue doing that.
Oh, so you just sort of tested posting on forums before you started the newsletter?
Exactly, yes. So the beginning of First 1,000 was me replying to a bunch of people in random Slacks and be like, hey, go watch this content. Or like, hey, this is like a 3-line description of this video that has 200 views about the company that's like very similar to the domain you're in. And I just knew these because I watched them before. Again, it was a pandemic. I had nothing better to do. And then I saw people react. Like I see like my comment would get like 20 other comments. And I was just like, hey, like there's something here. Like people are engaging, with me just like posting a link. Like what if I create a post about this? So that's what I did. And I was like, okay, let me, aggregate a bunch of these companies, aggregate a bunch of information about these companies, about how they got started from all, different sources on the internet. Just basically go to the first 2-3 years of their history and read every piece of content about that company and just like put it together in a format that you can read in like 2 to 5 minutes. And I started doing that and people liked it. So I started doing it more and more and more. And here we are today.
Wow. And thus, First 1000 newsletter on Substack was born.
Exactly. It's been a ride. I can't believe it's been like 3 years. That's crazy.
Wow. Ali, what do most founders not realize but should realize about getting their first 1,000 customers?
That's a very good question. So I have some data points because I spent a lot of my time and energy thinking about this, but also I've never built a company myself. So I want to say, just caveat this out, take it with a grain of salt. But what I have seen from talking to founders, from like researching a lot of founders, is that what it takes to like kickstart a company in terms of getting your first 100,000 customers is very different than what it takes to like build a company or like build a good product. A lot of the things you do at the beginning is just like, hey, can I do something novel enough that people will talk about? You know, can I have like a good story like to like pitch people, or can I, just like do some like marketing stunt that people be like, oh, that's like interesting, and like share it around. And that competency is very different. They're just like, hey, how do you build good product? How do you, like build like your growth loops within the product? How do you increase retention? And a lot of times people are good at one or the other. It's very hard to be good at both. And people who are good at both end up building really, really successful companies.
So these kind of tried and true strategies and sort of the quality of execution on those together.
Exactly.
What would be your top 3 tips and strategies for startup founders to get their first 1,000 customers?
So the first thing is, I guess, figure out who will want your product. I think a good way to figure this out is look at your competitors, figure out who their customers are, and then just trying to be in that like community, trying to be in that circle. It's really hard to, I mean, this, like people just like send you cold emails like all the time, be like, hey, try out this new thing. It solves a problem you have. And because it's so easy and the marginal cost of doing this is so cheap, you need to build trust. And the way to build trust is to like build relationships. And so to build relationships, you need to be a part of that community, right? So the first, like step number 1 is just like be a part of your customer's life. And it doesn't necessarily mean in the context of the product you're trying to sell, right? Just trying to go to the same events they do. If if the industry you're in has like a lot of events, or try to be in the same online spaces if it has like an active community, or even trying to be in the same kind of like network, like on like social network, if people on like B2B SaaS, there's a certain kind of people they follow, there's a certain kind of people that produce content in that space. Just trying to immerse yourself in those circles. So I guess that's the most important thing. Second most important thing is just be good at telling stories, especially your story. That comes with time, just like people practice, their story so much. But when you're just getting started, like one of the few things you have to your advantage is like your story. Like, why are you doing this? What do you stand for? And like a lot of bigger things than like, hey, let's make sure we have this X feature that's like 10% better than the company they've been using for 10 years. So getting that story in shape, figuring out how to, communicate a narrative to the people that you want to use your product is extremely, extremely important. And it's also very hard to do.
How about number 3?
I think if you just are where your customers are and you're able to effectively like communicate, I'll just say the third thing is go out and like do it, right? So just like do a lot more than you talk, right? Just like try a lot of different things. Most of the time you don't know what's going to work. And like most of the companies, especially that, are working, they're not selling something for like $100,000. Like a lot of the companies I write about are like consumer or prosumer companies, which they need a very large mass of audience to like make a lot of money. And you usually test your way into it. Most of them, what they did is just like they test their way into something that works. It's not, hey, I have this genius idea based on this strategy that I spent analyzing, all these market forces. It's just like, hey, let's try out 100 different things. 2% of them are going to work. But if you can just scale those two, you're good. So do a lot more than, you know, than you like plan or like think. Just like go out and like do stuff until you stumble upon something that works. And when you do, hold on to it and like squeeze as much, juice as you can from it.
Hey there, this is just a quick one to say if you're enjoying this video, the number one most helpful thing you can do to help us grow and bring you more amazing guests is just to press that subscribe button. And while you're at it, if you want to press the like button as well, that'll be awesome. Thanks so much. Now back to the show. Okay, so be where your customers are, focus on great narrative, and then great execution. And it sounds like a lot of that execution is related to testing a lot of things and then figuring out what works and then doubling down on that.
Yeah, a lot of it is related to speed, just like move fast, I don't want to say move fast and break things, but like move fast and like test a lot. Or just like move fast, do a lot of different things. And just like expanding on that idea, I think one thing that's like really interesting is this idea of like killing your darlings, where if you have something you're really excited about, the best thing you can do is figure out a very cheap way you can test it, because then if it doesn't work, and like a lot of time it doesn't, you can just be like, okay, let's move on and like focus on like other stuff. But sometimes, and I do that a lot at like my job at like Duolingo, where it's like, hey, I have this really cool idea, and just like go invest so much time, energy, and resources into it, versus it would have been so easy to just like validate in like 2-3 days if it has any merit. So just getting good at doing that and just generating ideas and figuring out how to test them really fast is a skill that is going to take you far.
You always have good signals on what there's demand for when you're trying to test. It seems like some things like network effects businesses, like maybe a dating app or something like that, may be difficult to get a signal on testing the actual product. How do you, for various types of products, how would you find those testing signals where it may not be as easy to test the actual product?
So I like to think this in the framework of like customer intent, right? So if you think about who you're trying to sell something to, you can sell something to someone who's like extremely high intent. These people have like very, very high expectation, and high intent usually correlates with, someone is going to spend a lot of money on your platform. Or you can go after like low intent, where, you're going to need to convince like a lot of people. And the way to test it is like, depends on like the level of intent your customer, like the end customer, is going to have. So an example is, hey, I'm building, like an AI like marketing platform that's gonna take over like all your marketing comms, and you don't need to spend like $2 million on like that kind of like domain like at your company. That's a very high intent customer, and the way you would test that, you're just like trying to go as narrow as you can, because they have very specific and like high like bar for you to clear. So just like go find someone who really cares about this, who kind of see what you see, and be like, hey, let's figure this out together, and like really shape the product around them, versus something more like network effects, like business, right? Like a social media business, or, like a two-sided marketplace and something like that. You would want to do the exact opposite approach. It's just like, hey, let's get a lot of different people, in a way that like increase the density of that network, but like trying to get them as fast as we can, so we can reach that point where we provide value. So a lot of it is just like building stuff that would appeal to a mass like consumer, just like would appeal to a very large number of people. And a lot of these features are going to be, like the onboarding features or like the activation features or stuff like that. It's just, this is how you get people to stick along for a few days until you get that density. So depending on, like the intent of your customer, how much pain they're suffering, and how much money they're willing to pay, and you can index that on like how much they currently pay to like the next best viable alternative, then you would change your approach from testing either very narrow to the most extreme version of just like very wide.
Okay, so it sounds like all of these kinds of things that are hard to build out an actual minimum viable product, you can actually just test by finding very high intent customers and then having conversations with them about how valuable that would be to them whether they'd want that, what kind of features they would want.
Yeah, just like work with them. If someone is going to give you $100,000, be like, hey, you know what? Like, I'm gonna go camp inside their like company or like outside their company. If they don't have a desk for me for like 7 days a week, just like build exactly what they want, and just like be like, hey, we want this feature. Go build it, get it back to them. Be like, what do you guys think? And I'll focus all my energy on just that one person. So that's what I do. That's what I've seen a lot of people do.
How about these kind of network effects, social media kind of companies like you were starting to talk about? Couldn't we just do a similar thing to find a very likely type of customer and have those kind of customer interviews with them as well?
What do you mean?
I mean, like, could it work similar for a network effects kind of like a dating app kind of business where you find people who are on these types of already using these types of services and have sort of customer conversations to test rather than actually build the product?
I think it's a little bit harder to do if a lot of the value of your business lies in who's on it. It's a lot harder to test that in theory, because who's on it is gonna drastically change how people use it, right? If you're building like a dating app, I mean, there's a bunch of like there's so many dating apps, and so much of them make a lot of money, and why people use like Hinge versus Tinder versus Bumble like completely depends on who else uses that product. So yes, you should talk to people and you should figure out, what you want your product to be and figure out what people are missing in other platforms. But you actually need to go out there and like get that sufficient mass to see how people actually behave. Because oftentimes what they tell you and how they behave are very different.
Okay, so in that type of business, you would actually have to build the product and then keep testing different iterations of it.
Yes.
What are some of the most interesting and surprising strategies that startups have used to get their first 1,000 customers?
That's a very good question. I think I'll give you some of my favorites. I really like it when people like do stuff that you wouldn't expect them to do. So I think there was this company called Neighbor, and what they did was they went out to they work in like the real estate like domain, and what they did is they went out and got like $1 bills and they just like put it under uh like deliver it to like all like an entire neighborhood at a time, and then with a card it just says, hey, sign up to like make money on our platform. I found this like to be like extremely smart, which is like, what, it's like literally just gave people money, and it's like the gesture of give you like a $1 bill, and like rather give my customers money than give Facebook, right? So I thought that was like really cool. I also like seen a lot of companies do that strategy successfully of like creating drops and linking those drops to whatever is happening in kind of the moment. So figuring out like what's in the news right now, like what are people talking about, and just like humping on that, like jumping on that trend, with some sort of like product that makes people laugh, or like a product that's actually useful because some companies shutting down and they need to like migrate their data and stuff like that. Those are very short lived, but like people who get good at building that muscle of just, hey, can we jump on these trends, figure out like what people care about right now, and I'm going to insert my company in a very smart and lightweight way into that conversation, is a very good way, and I've generally see it work extremely well for companies who can execute on it. So I'll say these are a couple of my favorites.
What's a good example that comes to mind of a company jumping on a trend?
I think Duolingo does that like really well. So I think Duolingo, we like whenever there's something happening, whether it's like the Barbie movie or like a craze with people being on like reality TV shows, just like being a lot more prominent on like social, on like Netflix and stuff like that. I think we just like do a really good job just like jumping on those trends, and it worked really well for us. I think another company that did that extremely well. Like a lot of the fast food chain, like I think Wendy's like does that like really well. And it's weird to like take product advice from like Wendy's, but like, hey, like they actually, build like such a strong um like distribution and such a strong brand by just like jumping on like trends. I think for like people who do it more on like a software based, um like people who do it more on like kind of like the software domain. I think there's this company that they did like payouts for creators. I can't remember their name right now. But what they did was when like Mixer was shutting down, they did this like migration tool for people to go from like take their view for creators to take their views from like viewers from like Mixer to like any other streaming platform they want to do. I thought that was like really really smart. There was another one that did like NFTs for like all like the VCs, and they would just like tag a VC and be like, "Hey, we created this like NFT, for like all the VCs back when like that was a thing." And then like you need to like tweet about it to like claim it, and like a bunch of VCs would like tweet about it. And the reason why that's like interesting is because um, they were building like a stock management solution. So these were kind of like the kind of customers they were going after, and also happened to have a lot of influence. So here and there, like people, have like done that in like a lot of different flavors. And the problem is it takes so much time and effort to like do that. Like if you're, just whenever something is out, it dies out really quickly. You have like 48, 72 hours to like make something and trying to push it into the world. But that's why like a lot of your competitors are not going to do that. If so if you have, that kind of creativity and, that's, you have that kind of skills and be like, okay, we're going to try to like insert ourselves into the conversation, it's going to work out if you do a good job, because not a lot of people are going to do that. And that's not the same as like doing paid marketing, because anyone can do it. But, coming up with a really creative idea and executing on it in like 2 days is like really, really hard.
Ali, in the course of writing the first 1000 newsletter, you've gotten a chance to speak to some really famous startup founders. What are some of the craziest and most unexpectedly brilliant stories you've heard about how some startups got their first 1000 customers?
I think one example that really comes to mind is, I think the story of Notion was extremely interesting. So the way Notion worked, it was kind of, it took them 4 years to like actually build like a product that works. And I thought, so the founder, started this company, raised a little bit of money. They spent like 2.5 years building it, kind of, like in beta. And then he realized like the tech stack he chose just didn't work. And I think if you spend 2.5 years, or I was thinking if I had spent 2.5 years, I'd be like, hey, this is the wrong tech stack. And like, I'm running out of money. I'll just like that was a good shot. We didn't get the kind of traction we wanted to get. And I would just, like pursue other ideas. And what he did was, he gave up his lease in San Francisco, moved to like, Asia. Him and his co-founder locked themselves up in, like a rental apartment. They didn't know anyone. And it's like, hey, we're going to recreate everything we spent 2.5 years building in like the next 6 months to a year, and like from the ground up, because we, made an arbitrary decision that just like happened to be bad. And they did that. And it took them, like at that time, it took them like 4 years before they actually launched the thing. And they launched it and it worked. Like as soon as they launched it, people are like, oh my God, this is like awesome. It was so crazy going back to like their first launch and product hunt and seeing the reaction of the people. Cause now everyone loves Notion, but like a few days after it launched, people had the exact same reaction they did today. And it was just like, hey, we're not going to ship anything we're not like absolutely proud of. And that's, I mean, that sounds good in theory, but I find it very hard for like someone to actually do, is to like give up on so much work you've done over, like so many years, and then, just absolutely lock yourself down for like more than a year. And it's like, be like, hey, we're going to build everything from scratch, just like me and this other person. And we're going to build it to perfection. Like, we're not going to launch anything that's not perfect. And most of the time, like a lot of the startup advice you hear, or that I definitely heard, is like, hey, you know what, just like build something, uh, build an MVP. It doesn't have to be perfect. Get it out there, get like feedback. And they did the exact opposite, and it kind of worked. And I saw that happen in like a bunch of different domains, where people would do something and people do the exact opposite, and both of them work.
Hmm.
And people who do kind of like in the middle usually does not work. I just like find that like extremely interesting to like think about, if you take something to like kind of like the extreme, as long as like you have a viewpoint, and like that extreme is not like bad for like you, your companies, your employees. But if you be like, hey, we think there's a lot of value in like learning from like running a lot of experiments, we're gonna run a lot of experiments and learn as fast as we can, because we just don't know enough about like our domain. Or the exact opposite, be like, there's so many competitors in that like domain, that if we don't come out of the gate with something that's like 10 times better than what's out there, it's never going to work. And having that opinion and taking it to the furthest you can, usually pays off really well for the company that does that.
How do you think founders should decide whether they want to go extreme on maximizing the perfect product that they envision, or maximizing the classic lean startup mentality of just launch it, ship it before it's ready? How should they decide? Is that just particular to what resonates with you as a person, or you as a type of product?
I mean, either approach works, and you see a lot of you see like even extremely big companies nowadays who just like do one or the other. Like you see Amazon like does this way a lot, versus Apple like does not. And whenever they ship something, it has to be like to perfection, and they have a very high bar to shipping. Um, I think the way it works in like the startup land, or the way I've seen it work for like smaller companies, has a lot to do with what you're selling, what your competitors are selling. If you're trying to do something new where there's a lot for you to learn, you probably want to experiment a lot. If it's if you're working with like AI right now, you probably want to experiment your way to like find something that works. If you're building an HR software that there's a lot of competitors, very established ones, or you're building an expense managing tool, you probably want to build something that's like a lot better. So a lot of it has to do with what's the area you're operating in, what's the state of the market and your competitors, and how much do you need to learn versus how much do you already know. Like if you have a very strong hypothesis, you probably want to execute on it, versus if be like, hey, I think there's something here, I don't know exactly what it is, then you probably want to test a lot to like learn how different things and how different changes impact the way your customers behave.
Of course, there's many different types of business models. There's startups that are B2C startups, startups that sell to consumers. There's B2B startups, startups that sell to other businesses. There's marketplace startups, software startups, hardware startups, network effect startups, etc. How much do the strategies for getting your first 1,000 customers differ depending on business model? And how should founders think about tailoring their strategies depending on their business model?
That's a very good question. I think one thing to think about is the idea of like first 1,000 or like first 100 or like whatever benchmark you have. Is the idea there is like you reach a certain number of people where you validate your hypothesis, you validate the idea for your company, and it resonates with a number of people that be like, maybe there's something here, right? That's the whole idea of like what I write about. And when people talk about first 1,000, getting your first 1,000 customers, usually that's what it means to be like, I built something that there's a large number of people out there that like it. And that means that's a good signal for me to pursue like that idea, and just like build a lot more on top of it until we can scale it to hopefully hundreds of millions or even billions of people. And if you think about the business model, I think one way to approach that question is to think, for all these different business models, what do you need to validate your hypothesis, right? So if you're selling B2B software for like enterprises, what do you need to like actually validate that what you're building is good enough? I mean, if you get like, like Microsoft to sign up to use your product, that's good enough. So all you need to do is you need to figure out, how can I get someone, like someone like Microsoft to use that product, and how can I figure out what they need so I can incorporate it into my product, and start selling it. If you think about, like like a social network, what you need is you need to prove that people find value in other people being on that platform. So you probably want to go and find some like microcosm of people. A lot of people do it on like universities because there's like high density there, or even high schools, or even like small towns, and be like, can I get can I get people on this platform? And when more people come to that platform, does engagement go up, does retention go up? And that would validate your hypothesis. So you probably are going to start thinking about finding those microcosms. If you're if you're thinking about like hardware, then you probably want to figure out, are people going to sell, are people going to buy this, or is this compelling enough for them to spend tens or even hundreds or even thousands of dollars? And a lot of hardware startups would go and be like, can we raise an initial set of money? Be like, hey, we have this prototype, would you give us some sort of down payment, or even pay in advance, and we'll give you a huge discount, to kind of validate that this is something people are willing to pay for. So yes, the business model matters a lot, and the reason why it matters is because it's very different way, uh, because of the way you make money really dictates what thing you need to prove to make sure you're on the right track.
I've heard it said that all a startup needs in order to be successful is 100 true believers. What's the relationship between 100 true believers and 1,000 first customers? And which one should startup founders focus on first?
I think for startups, having people that really, really, really like your product is usually going to give you like a strong signal about like where you should go next. Because if you can figure out, oh, if I can get 10 people or 100 people like super excited about what I'm building, and they have a lot of ideas and they give you a lot of feedback, that's gonna really improve the trajectory of where you're going. It's going to help you define like what to do next and really refine your thinking, versus having a lot of people that kind of like your product and you're kind of shooting in the dark a little bit. So I guess that's like the context behind like having like true believers. Just they're gonna point you in the right direction, and a lot of times that's what you need, because there's so many things you can do when you're just starting a company. It's a blank slate. You can do whatever you want. Um, that being said, though, not all companies need that, right? Like a lot of companies, the entire premise of it is like, if it's built on like distribution or like getting people in like very fast, like you can think about a lot of companies that do like quizzes kind of thing, where there's a lot of virality and novelty into the product, and what they're selling is that novelty. So you're not going to get people to, it's very hard for you to be like, hey, I'm going to get a lot of people to really like filling out like quizzes on Facebook. Like, maybe not. But for them, it's just like, I want to get a lot of people that interact with this thing that kind of like it, and just like find some sort of value that they would like invite a friend, because they have all the virality mechanics, even though people would churn like after 7 days. It's like, yep, we're not going to do that anymore. So it really depends on like what what you're trying to sell, what you're trying to build. I guess in a lot of cases, if you're really taking the long view and you're trying to build something that will survive like decades, you want to strike a chord. And having striking a chord with however number of people that is, hopefully it's a million people. It's like, hopefully like there's a lot of brands out there that have a very large population of people to advocate for it. But if you want to build something to survive for a really, really long time, it usually starts with you striking a chord, and that would mean just like people really, really love and care about the product you're building.
So, First 1000 newsletter has experienced tremendous growth from 0 to 75,000 subscribers. What are some of the strategies that you have used to grow your customer base to 1,000 and beyond?
For me, I think the main thing was figuring out how many people I need to get like every day to like hit a certain milestone. Because with content, as with a lot of different things, is it compounds over time. If you get 1,000 people, and you usually have like 2% of people that subscribe like talk about your like newsletter, the more people you have, the faster it's gonna grow. And as with anything that compounds, the problem is you need to reach a certain inflection point. Now, when I started, I didn't know what the inflection point was. Turns out it's around like 10,000 like people, and then it starts to like really pick up organically. But I was like, okay, in the first 6 months, I want to hit like 1,000 people. And then I calculated how many people is that a week? How many people is that a day? And it's like, oh, okay, I only need to have like 7 subscribers like every day or something like that. So we're like, okay, I have 8 hours a day. I need to get 7 people subscribed. What are we going to do today? And do that long enough, you're going to get there. And, sometimes it'd be like, hey, I got 14 people yesterday. So today I don't need to acquire anyone. I'm just going to, try out some like crazy stuff that maybe it's not going to work, but like if it does, it's going to be really big and stuff like that. So I just like had an Excel sheet. It was like, hey, today I should have 32. I'm at like 29. I'm like 3 behind. And then, okay, I need to find like 3 people before I go to bed. And it, if you take it down to like that level, it's like very easy. I just like go tell my mom, be like, hey, like, can you sign up? She signs up and be like, okay, 1 down, 2 to go. My dad is sleeping. Maybe I'll talk to one of my brothers. And it's like, hey, like I'm done for today. And like, that's what I did. And then tomorrow, like maybe I cannot tell my family, I can ask my family, but maybe I can ask my friends. And then the day after that, you're like, oh, maybe I can ask people I, like kind of worked with before. And it's just like you figure out ways to like get, 6, 7, 8 people every day. And over time, just get really good at it. So just, that's all I did. And it didn't take me that much time either. But once I hit 1,000 and then, like 2,000, and then it's like started picking up, and then, do more of these stuff on like slightly bigger scale, like over time. And then you end up like having, tens of thousands of people that read it.
What are some other examples, once you ran out of family and friends, of ways that you got to that first 1,000 customers and then from 1,000 to that inflection point of 10,000?
Yeah, so I could tell you a few examples. I think one example was creating like a referral program, and the way I created it, I know like I knew referrals are like big in content in general, but the way I created mine is you lose all your referrals at the end of the month, and I thought that was like a very neat way to keep people referring more people, because what I realized is that's appealing to like whatever prizes I had, or so I'm gonna give you a shout out on my next issue or something like that, was appealing to a very small subset of people, like power referrals or whatever, but they get stuck. It'll be like, between milestones, it get really, really hard. And like, what am I going to offer them at 1,000 referrals? It's like, that's really, really hard. So I was like, okay, most of my value is coming from very few people that really care about, like that program. So I'm going to continue to incentivize those people. Be like, hey, I'm going to have 4 tiers. The last one is at 50. But all your referrals expire at the end of the month. So if you don't get 50 this month, we're going to try again this month. And if you do get 50, the price is different next month. So maybe you can try again and like get more rewards. And that just, I think, increased the volume of like referrals like crazy. Because people would, they found like a game. There's like do it every month, they get something different, and they didn't get stuck. So that was one thing that really worked for me. The other thing that really, really worked was Hacker News. So I just found myself on kind of the front page of Hacker News like a few times, especially very early on. I was like, that was also like very validating. Like, maybe there's like something here. Until I read the comments, I was like, people don't like it on Hacker News because they don't like anything. Uh, but it's like got me like a lot of exposure. So that was another thing that really worked. Did a bunch of kind of collaboration with like other writers that were kind of in the same stage as I was. We'd write pieces together. They'd write on my newsletter, I'd write on theirs. So nothing that's like crazy. Like I didn't do anything. It's like, oh my God, I had this genius idea. I just did a lot of things and a few of them worked. And the ones that worked kind of like there for a program and just kept going further and further until I'd be like, okay, as far as I can like make it work. So that's what I did.
What are some of the most important key concepts and actionable strategies that startup founders and others should take from this interview about how to get their first 1,000 customers?
I think first thing is figure out the things that matter and the things that don't. So we touched upon that and like thinking about like business models and thinking about different kinds of companies and like the way they operate, but like figure out what is the thing that matters to the success of my company, and then have an opinion on how you're going to get there, and the way you execute, just like make sure it's aligned with your opinion on how to get there, and it's aligned with working towards the thing that matter. Don't get caught up in like stuff that doesn't. So when I was growing my first 1,000 newsletter, the most important thing was it's like top of the funnel. I just want to get more subscribers. And I spent kind of like all my energy and time on like thinking about that, maybe a lot more than I did about thinking about content, because it's like, hey, if I have a big enough audience, then like the leverage I get on my time and my writing is like sharing, like all these stories, it's a lot higher than writing something that's like really, really good and spending 200 hours writing it to like 7 people. So just figure out the things that matter, have an opinion on how to get there, and just like work towards that. I'll say that's what everyone should do.
We hear a lot about growth hacking. Are there great hacks you can use to get your first 1,000 customers? Or does it really boil down to basic things like building a great product, doing a lot of testing, understanding your customer, and these kind of basic key concepts that you execute really well on?
I think when people use the term growth hack, I think a lot of the time what they mean is they did something new that was cheap, that worked, right? So we created like the famous examples like Dropbox and like their referral program and how they gave out, like extra storage is like, hey, we figured out a better incentive for referral programs that's not money, that we tied back to the product, and that ended up working really, really well for us. And be like, hey, I created a growth hack, right? That's what they mean. So the idea of you coming up with something novel that would help you grow your company is very valid. But it's also really, really hard. So that's why a lot of the times you just hear about the same like 5, 6 examples. There, just like it's extremely hard to just come up with something completely new that like resonates with your target customers, especially very early when you don't know that much, or you're just like still figuring it all out. So yes, it does work, but kind of as soon as it works, it stops working anymore, because it means like 1,000 other people have tried it, and then people just like kind of grow blind to it. So you always need to be pushing kind of the boundaries, and it's really hard to do.
What has been your favorite issue of the newsletter to write, and do you think would be a especially interesting one for people to check out?
I wrote this maybe a year ago. It was called 53 Ideas to Get Your First 1,000 Customers. And that was a culmination of like a lot of the research I've done for a lot of my prior issues. So a lot of times I would, start with a company and, be like, okay, I decide to take a different path or something like that. And then go like talk to like a different company. And I just like had like a lot of these, interesting tidbits that were sitting like all over the place. So I kind of like put it all together in just like one issue. I was just like, hey, here's like really interesting things that people did to kind of grow. And here's like a lot of them. And that was like one of my favorite things to like write, and hopefully it'll be as interesting for your audience to read.
Cool. Sounds great. That sounds like a combination, sort of amalgamation of a lot of the tips you've published in various other newsletters. So we'll try to drop that particular issue in the show notes, along with the website address for the newsletter subscription. And it's a free newsletter still, right?
It is free, and it's always going to be free.
Wow. Lots of great value in that for everyone. Why did you decide to make that decision to keep it as a free newsletter?
For me, I think writing is a way to like organize my thoughts. Like a lot of times you see something working, and then you see something that you really think is going to work, but then it doesn't work, and then you see like polar opposites, kind of like what we discussed earlier at work. And writing is a forcing function to be just like go and like dig a little bit deeper to try and understand, the why behind like why this thing happened. It's also an opportunity for me to, kind of like meet a lot of like interesting people, and kind of, explore their viewpoints, kind of figure out how they look at certain things, which a lot of times is different than I do. Like everyone has their own, like worldview or something of that sort. So it, at the end of the day, it's really valuable, like for me, and like the reason why I write is it's very selfish. It's amazing that just like a lot of people read it right now, but like for me, it's it's having an audience, having a like especially like a big audience is like very motivating. Be like, okay, now I need to like go out and like write more and spend more time on like producing content. And like I'd rather have that, than like I'd rather have that and continue to grow than not, by trying to make some money or whatever.
Tell me a little about your personal and career journey. How did you get to where you are today?
So I started off right after school. I worked in VC for a little bit. That was in the Middle East, in Dubai. So spent a little bit of time there. Got like, absolutely loved it. It was a fantastic like experience. And then, after spending a couple of years, I was just like, hey, like I want to actually go and like build stuff. That also happened to be around the time where COVID happened. So I went back home to Egypt, started working, for like a bunch of startups. At the same time, I, was like preparing to like get my master's. And after working for a couple of these companies, I came here to the US. I came to New York. To do my master's, and as soon as I finished that, I went to Duolingo to do product management.
Cool. So you're a product manager by day and a newsletter for First 1000 by night. Was there anything unexpected about your career journey?
I think I worked in a lot of different industries. Like I've done a lot of things. I've done HR, I've done paid marketing, I've done biz dev, I've done front end engineering, I've done product, um, I've done investments, I've done operations. I've done a lot of things. And usually I just like do them for a little bit until I realize I don't like them anymore. Just like I move on. Um, which was not amazing, if you're thinking in like career progression, oh like I wanna, be this and then get promoted and be that. But it was really good to kind of help me figure out what I actually like. It was just like I didn't know. And I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go try a bunch of different things, and whatever I don't like, I'm just gonna move on and try something completely different. And that's what I did. And today, like I wake up and I like absolutely love going to work. Like I love like Duolingo. I love like everything we do. It's just like it's so much fun. It gives me so much energy, which is like weird to like say that out loud from a job. And then I go back home, like have dinner, then open like my laptop and like start writing content. And it gives me so much energy. Like by the time I go to sleep, I don't feel like, oh my God, like I'm so exhausted. Like, oh my God, I don't want to wake up tomorrow. I don't want to go to work. Like it's just, I figured out through a lot of trial and error. It's just like, hey, like this is the kind of environment I like to be in. These are the kind of people I would like to be working with. And this is the kind of work I like to do. And I, slowly started doing like only that. So
Well, it's so great to love what you do and be excited about what you do. That sounds like a real recipe for success.
it's good not to burn out. It's like you go. It's so easy, I guess. It's so easy for someone like someone like me to like grind for like a few years and just like be like, okay, I'm just gonna grind for the next 4 or 5 years because I wanna, I have this idea in my head about like where I want to be, but like I absolutely hate what I'm doing. And I don't know if I ever talked to someone who actually ever made that jump. It's like, oh, dude, you know what? I hate it right now, but it's gonna be so good in like 3 years when I become X, Y, or Z. I never heard someone just like actually like made that transition. Most of the time, it's just like you end up doing something different that like gives you joy. So just trying to search for it early.
I mean, never heard someone who successfully made the transition from grinding hard in aspiration to getting to some happy place that actually got to the happy place. Is that what you mean?
No, I guess what I mean is people who grind hard at something they don't like and they think it's going to change in some time frame, right? To be like, hey, not to pick, like any job. It's just like, hey, like, I mean, I can pick on myself, be like, hey, like, I don't like being a product manager, but you know what? I'm going to spend the next 3, 4 years like grinding it out. And then I'm going to be, the head of product. I'm going to think a lot of like big picture and like it's going to be like amazing. That never happens.
So better to iterate and change quickly if you really aren't happy what you're doing and find something that you really are aligned with in your strengths and interests.
That worked for me. So from my one data point, I say like kind of works. Maybe give it a shot.
I guess as you sort of alluded to earlier, there's a difference between, that may be a really valuable thing to do to figure out what you really resonate with. But on the other hand, HR departments can be pretty narrow-minded and are often looking for people who've done exactly what they're looking to hire for and who have sort of a long and consistent history with not much change and no gaps. And how do you kind of solve for both, or change and iterate and find what you love and what resonates with you, but then you know deal with aligning yourself to if you're going to work for a corporation or a company, aligning your narrative or something so that you sort of still fit in that square hole or whatever, what have you.
I can tell you from like my own personal experience, it was more of it depends on like where you want to work. I think for the companies that that were like really attractive to me, that I really wanted to work and like a place like Duolingo, I think the way they look at people is they want to look for like a strong signal. They'll be like, hey, like that person has done something that's like extremely interesting or intriguing versus, I mean, especially for like people who are just like coming out of school and like new grads and stuff like that versus like a true experience in like doing that same job like over and over again. When we're hiring for like someone to lead a certain like area or like lead like a certain team that has like a very specific mandate, we would usually go and look for someone who has an experience in a very relative domain. Like we're not looking for someone with potential. So I guess the trade-off there is you'd usually start like from the beginning. Like you wouldn't, like, a lot of your experience is not going to translate to where you want to go. But if you're okay with that, if you think that's a trade-off worth making, then you're not going to be set back by a lot, right? It's just, and like another thing to think about it is like any career, and that's like very interesting, is like it usually take you like, if you're really good, it would take you like 10 years, maybe less, to like climb to the top of your industry. If you'd be like, hey, if you're really, really good and you get promoted every, year and a half, and you just like, you need to like get promoted like 5, 6 times to like be, considered, just like, like very high up in wherever the domain you're at, you have so many, like decades in your life to like actually work, like even if you start at like 50, can do it by 60, like that's fine. So like careers are not that, especially in tech, they're not that thing where you have to work towards for like 40 years. Actually, you can get to the top really, really fast. So, starting one level below was like, for me, I was like, whatever, I just, that's fine as long as I know I'm at the right place and like I'm doing something that like I really want to do. I'd rather have taken, a couple of detours before arriving here and just, you know, make sure I'm the right destination versus land somewhere randomly because, it's like in school, that's what like my three roommates like cared about. So I'm gonna end up doing this for the rest of my life.
All right, let's do the bonus round. Are you ready?
I am ready.
What excites and inspires you?
People really good at their craft, no matter what that craft is.
What's something about you that most people wouldn't expect?
I have a very cool collection of shoes. Like I have the best shoes you can ever see.
What kind of shoes are we talking?
I have like all the neon colors. So I have like bright, like green shoes. I have like Lego shoes. They're just like made out of Legos. I just like I have really cool shoes.
Wow. Okay. Sneakers mostly or everything?
A lot of it are sneakers, but a lot of it are not.
Do you actually wear these every
I
day
wear
or
them to work. I wear them to work every day, and people like give me compliments, and it's more like, what? I'd be like, oh, like I saw your shoes from a mile away. I'd be like, oh, I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you. I was like, that's what I was going for today. But
how many pairs are we talking?
not a crazy number.
Do you hold a view on something that most people don't agree with you about?
I think a lot of the way we make decisions, like especially irrational decision, is based on like two feelings. It's either like desire or fear, and just to like double click on that, it's just like the desire is your desire to be seen as somewhat of a role model. So you want to see that you're like ahead of like other people, you want to be seen as like you're better than other people. And fear is kind of, like the opposite of that. It's just like not, it's just like fear of like being like an outcast or something along those lines. Whenever you do something or like spend a lot of energy to like make a decision and just like go back to like why you're spending so much like energy there, a lot of the time it's going to come down to you wanting to, or you having some sort of desire to like be ahead or better than other people, or you're afraid of you being like outcasted from like a certain like social group, which I found is a very interesting way to kind of view the world.
Sure. I mean, that must be sort of hardwired into us from our evolutionary tribal survival. What do you think is a better way that you would advise people once they have gained that kind of self-awareness that they are making a lot of decisions based on that? What would you advise people as a better way to make life decisions?
What I do is I just tell myself whenever I'm feeling, especially fear. I think fear is a lot easier to deal with than desire. I think whenever you feel fear, just do the thing you're afraid of. If it's as simple as like, like I'm afraid how I'm gonna be perceived by like my like colleague or my boss. Or just like if I ask like this question, just do it. And most of the time your fear is gonna be ungrounded because like no one thinks, you know, uh like about you as much as you think about yourself. I think with desire is just like sleep on it. So whenever you feel, I'll be like, oh, you know what, like someone said this thing, and just like, oh, I can, like I did something better, or just like, oh, like you went to like you took like a, I don't know, like a business class ticket. Oh, I actually took a first class ticket. Like I'm better than you, or stuff like that. Just like be like, just like constrain yourself, sleep on it. Like don't say the first thing that comes out, because a lot of what we do is just we're trying to signal to like other people. So when you're the one trying to like give out the signal, just like hold yourself back. Or when you feel you're afraid you're going to give off like a wrong signal, just go and do it. So it's exactly the opposite of what you're feeling usually works.
So lean into your fear. It's usually unfounded, and when you have desire of how you're seen by others, take some distance from that.
Yep, exactly.
What do you think in a more like proactive sense? What do you think is the sort of principles you should design your decisions to move you towards instead of fear and sort of social image desire? What do you think is sort of the core principle that people should use instead?
To make decisions?
Yeah. I mean, you think you should be aligned with what sort of just resonates and excites you on an intuitive level that can't really be explained, or have a sort of rational um, objective of a vision they see themselves as being happy in, or how would you, what's a better
Yeah,
approach?
I think a better approach is to, first of all, prioritize your future self over your current self. I think a lot of the times you're, making the trade-off to like be happy right now versus, not being so happy in the future. I'm gonna, like eat a lot of fast food. I'm gonna be so happy, but 90-year-old you is not gonna be that happy. So one easy way to make decisions would be like, I'm going to do what's better for my future versus what's better for my present. I think that's a very easy tactical way to make decisions. Another like very tactical way to like make decisions is constraining yourself and just like really taking your time, right? So like a lot of these like impulse, like feelings that we have is just like, hey, I'm gonna really constrain myself to like the one thing that matter. I'm gonna take my time to like make a decision, especially if it's a big one. Um, and like a third thing, which is usually what I do when I'm like facing a larger scale problem, is like I call it like collect, reflect, talk, and then take action. So you collect information, you build your opinion, you reflect on that. So kind of, at the beginning keep an open mind, and then you're trying to form an opinion, and then you go talk to other people who have opposing opinions, and then you reflect on that conversation. And once you've done these different interactions, so you covered all the bases, you came to your own conclusion, you see where other people are coming from, you're trying to debate your side versus their side, and come back and putting that all together, I think usually is a good place for you to start actually doing the work. So I use that a lot when I'm like working on, like a much bigger project, which is going to take like 6 months or like 9 months or something along those lines, to make sure where the building blocks are, the right building blocks. So I'll say those are three good ways to make decisions.
What's some advice you would give your younger self?
I would say maybe not having strong opinions on things that don't matter. Like I would say is just like at the beginning, you get excited by a lot of things. I'd be like, oh, like I think this is right, or I think we should do this way. Why are we doing it that way? And a lot of the things you have opinions about, it's like at the end of the day, they're not going to move the needle. So just like have less of those opinions. And when you have a strong opinion, make sure it's on like something that like really, really matters. And you're always, like constantly reevaluating that. So.
I think Marcus Aurelius, probably the most famous emperor of Rome, who and author of Meditations, says something similar, that you don't need to have an opinion about a lot of things.
Exactly. Yep.
When you're gone from this earth, what would you like to be remembered for?
I would like to be remembered for making a difference. You can make a difference in many ways, but one thing that really resonates with me is just removing some pain from your life, from your day-to-day life, making it 1% better. There's a lot of things out there that's like removed like pain from your life, like on a grand scheme of things, like Uber, it's so much easier to like get around. And then on a much smaller scale is like, hey, when you get those OTP messages or these verification codes, they just get autofilled because you use an iPhone. So it's a large spectrum of things you can do, but I'd love to do something like that.
All right. Well, Ali, it's been really a pleasure to talk to you today and to learn more about how startups get their first 1,000 customers. And I really appreciate your time being on the show. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sasha, for having me. This was awesome. And hope I get to see you in person sometime soon.
Yeah, that'd be great. Love it.